Trump's approach to ending the war in Ukraine seems to be peace through surrender. Are we in a constitutional crisis now, by the way? And then finally, Ravi's going to educate me about a pop culture story that has become a right wing obsession. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
All right, Jason, let's start with this Ukraine story. Trump has been making news all week, starting with this claim that it wasn't Russia who started this war. Let's go to the video.
I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine.
Okay, so just so we're clear, Trump is blaming the victim because Ukraine was invaded by Russia, and he's like, look at what you were wearing, Ukraine. You were asking for it, and you've had 3 years to end this war, so why would I invite you to this party where we are going to, I guess, divide up? I don't know. I'm very angry. Ravi, you talk.
Well, he also posted on Truth Social today that Zelenskyy is a dictator and pointed out that he hasn't had elections, which I don't know where to begin here. Obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you don't need us to tell you that Russia started the war or that
by invading them,
or that it's hard to hold elections when you're being bombed out in your major cities. Like, think about how hard it is for us to hold elections in peacetime. He made claims about like Zelenskyy's popularity being at like 2% or 4% when it's really at 50%, according to the polls that we have, which obviously aren't going to be imprecise. But obviously, like, it begs so many questions. Like let's pretend like even half of what he's saying about Ukraine is true. Like, have you looked at Russia? Like, what is going on here?
Well, really they have elections, Ravi.
Yeah, they have elections.
They have air quotes elections.
So I think this is the headline for this is that I think there was a lot of speculation, I think, early on. We are early on in the Trump administration, but mere weeks ago that Trump was going to be, there was no, like, I think people were downplaying whether he'd be better or worse, right? And also there were Trump supporters heading into this election. We're like, if he was fine last time, which I don't think he was fine last time. I know you don't think either, but like us, like just taking that argument on the face of it, right? Which is that if we were okay during the first 4 years, that we're going to be okay now. I think it is very clear, very early.
I was one of those people
far
who
worse.
Thought, well, maybe it'll be okay. I'm getting pretty upset and scared.
It's far worse than I think this is the worst case scenario early on. Mm-hmm. That's my take.
Particularly if you're in Ukraine, where this is quite obviously. Trump is planning to go to this negotiating table, if you can call it that. I mean, it's like two sharks meeting to negotiate over like a swimmer, and in Saudi Arabia with Russia, and he's already trying to lay the groundwork for, hurting the U.S. approval rating of Zelenskyy and of Ukraine so that he can screw them over. I mean, like, there's no other way around it. That's obviously what they're doing. Calling him a dictator, saying he's not popular. The dude was elected with like 70+% of the vote, and is a wartime leader. And as far as polling that shows it at 50%, I don't even know how you poll in Ukraine right now. I think it would be very difficult. But I just, it's so cynical and it's so upsetting. And on top of that, we have the task of, if you want to convince people about how wrong it is here, it is very difficult to get Americans to care about something that's happening overseas if they don't think it directly affects them. And it is getting harder and harder to make that case. And Trump knows that. And the far right, the like pro-Russia right, which exists and is growing, has wanted to just hand Ukraine over to Russia the whole time. And
Yeah, I think people forget that there was an actual scandal that was little noticed before the election, where Russia was explicitly paying right-wing figures, right? Like in the deluge of all sorts of crazy stuff that's happened over the past few months, people forget that like it's not even just an indirect misinformation campaign. They're buying off members of the right. And I think this is really bad. I was thinking about my time at the United Nations, where the US would often come together with France and the UK and whatever non-permanent members of the Security Council were out there, and we would be the good guys, quote unquote. Now it's never that simple, but we always knew who the bad guys were, who were the people who, when Iran was working on its nuclear program or North Korea was testing missiles or whatever, you can count on the quote unquote bad guys in Russia and China to advocate for whatever bad actors around the world there are. And that they would also be the kinds of people who would downplay genocide happening in Sudan or anything like that. The brutal realization in looking at this is that we are now part of the bad guy coalition. Now we are the bad guys. We might be the worst of the guys in terms of just not because what happens in the US is worse than what happens in China, but because even China has limits in terms of how far they would go on something like this, like at least publicly. Like they wouldn't say the things that Trump is saying right now. And that's a pretty amazing realization.
It's sad. What is the saying? You are the average of the people you hang out with the most. And look, the American people are not bad guys. But if the American government is going to align itself with Russia, then that puts you close to Russia. That puts your country close to Russia. And like we should refresh ourselves on who Russia is. Like in my personal experience, when we were working to get people out of Afghanistan in 2021 and 22, and the reason we were using encrypted communication apps was not because we thought the Taliban had the ability to spy. They clearly didn't. It's because we knew, and there was really credible intelligence that was pretty well confirmed, that the Russians were supporting the Taliban with signals intelligence and spying on communications in order to help the Taliban carry out retribution against people who had served democracy in the prior government or served with the pro-democracy coalition. That's a pretty high level of bad guy credibility when you're like, hey, Taliban, we're with you, right? I watched this documentary recently where this guy, it's called Hollywood Gate, and I highly recommend it. And it's this guy got access to the Taliban for 1 year after they took over. And this guy is he follows around two people, one of which is the Air Force minister, the director of the Air Force. And at the end of the movie, they put on an air show for the leaders of the Taliban because they've revamped all this leftover American equipment and gotten it running again. And they put on this air show, and then these dignitaries who are permanent dignitaries assigned to Afghanistan show up, and they're wearing suits, and they're like, bowing to the leader of the Taliban. And they are two dudes in suits. One of them is the ambassador from Iran, and the other is the ambassador from Russia. Like, they're bad guys, really, really bad guys. And that's the team that our country is joining against our wishes. And frankly, against the wishes of the majority of Americans, because I know a lot of people voted for Trump, or more people than voted for Kamala, but it is not that the majority of Americans want to join Team Russia. That's just not the case, and we need to remind everybody that this is happening.
It's also worth mentioning that the Trump administration has been making preemptive concessions to the Russians every step of the way here, including that Ukraine won't join NATO, or that Zelenskyy needs to hold elections before the negotiations, which, for people who want to know what's going on there, look, let's say it is 50% approval that Zelenskyy has, right? There's a couple things that are accomplished by forcing Zelenskyy to hold elections. Number one is distracting from the war effort. It gives Russia an opportunity to claim further territory while Zelenskyy has to worry about campaigning in the middle of a war. That's number one. Mm-hmm. Number two is there's a chance he loses an election, which is what happens when you have an election in a democracy, at which point Russia could have a favorable pro-Russia candidate where obviously they could also sow disinformation and misinformation in that election, which they will, to try to get their favorable candidate in. So it's rather depressing that the U.S. is serving Russia's interests. And it reminds me of the Netanyahu stuff, where I don't want to compare Israel to Russia in any way, but it's like a good example of like sometimes like what the Trump administration is doing is just they don't know how to negotiate these types of deals at all. Or worst case scenario, they do know how to negotiate and they're stacking the deck in favor of whoever their allies are. And maybe it's a little bit of both.
Well, look at the difference between the hard line that they take with Mexico and Canada versus Russia, right? Or China. Like they, you never can tell where they really are with China. He claims to be a very hard line, but then he seems to really admire the leader of China. But then with Canada and Mexico, they have this approach where we're gonna threaten, or with Colombia or Venezuela, we're gonna threaten these massive sanctions or tariffs, and then when you go along and do this smaller thing that we asked for, we're going to say that it was because we threatened it, and then we're going to, like, it's a very hard line, and we can debate that, and you and I have talked about those, but that's a complete, and this is what I think listeners should mention when you talk about why this troubles you with what they've done with Ukraine. You're going to take a hard line against Canada and Mexico, and then you're going to give Russia everything they want. Russia, who is traditionally and even contemporaneously not an ally of ours. Like, Trump wants to have a good relationship with Russia. We can debate all day whether that's a good idea, but at the end of the day, our interests internationally just don't line up next to Russia's. Maybe some of Trump's real estate interests do, but that's it. And then you're gonna do this hard line with Mexico and Canada, but then with Russia, it's like, hey, meet me in Saudi Arabia, and we'll just talk about how we're going to screw over Ukraine. That it doesn't make any sense, and it only makes sense if the only thing you respect is power, and that's where Trump is. He calls Zelenskyy a dictator, but like Putin is a dictator, which is why Trump seems to admire him so much.
Well, we're going to take a break, Jason, and when we come back, we're going to talk about our looming constitutional crisis.
Yay!
The activities over at Doge, and then a little bit of Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni.
Typical children's vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk growing kids should never eat. That's why Hiya was created, the pediatrician-approved, superpowered, chewable vitamin. While most children's vitamins are filled with 5 grams of sugar and can contribute to a variety of health issues, Hiya is made with 0 sugar and 0 gummy junk, yet it tastes great and it's perfect for picky eaters, i.e. kids. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste that they love. Formulated with the help of nutritional experts, Hiya is pressed with a blend of 12 organic fruits and veggies, then supercharged with 15 essential vitamins and minerals, including vitamin D, B12, C, zinc, folate, and many others to help support immunity, energy, brain function, mood, concentration, teeth, bones, and more. It's non-GMO, vegan, dairy-free, allergy-free, gelatin-free, nut-free, and everything else that you can imagine. Hiya is designed for kids of all ages and sent straight to your door so parents have one less thing to worry about. As you know, I'm a father and I'm always on the lookout for the best possible vitamins for my child to take. I'm so happy that I've come across Hiya Health. The ingredients are amazing and I don't have to worry about sugar or gummy junk because Hiya Health is made without that stuff and is still able to keep the great taste, which is super important because that's how you get kids to eat it. We've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hiyahealth.com/majority. This deal is not available on the regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/majority and get your kids the full body nourishment that they need to grow into healthy adults.
February's here, and whether you're beating the winter blues or just need a little extra spark, microdosing could be the perfect way to level up your routine. Forget the heavy highs, Stay focused, energized, and in control with just the right amount of boost. This year, Via is here to support you in your journey to become your best self. Trusted by over 500,000 happy customers, Via is the Swiss Army knife of wellness, dedicated to harnessing the natural benefits of hemp to create high-quality wellness products. From setting the mood into the bedroom to chilling out after a long day, Via has something for you. Their award-winning THC and THC-free gummies offer the perfect microdose to help you feel just right without ever slowing you down. Forget about blocking off hours for the heavy high. With Via, you get all the benefits of hemp in a precise, easy microdose that gives you a boost without compromising your responsibilities. A little lift all day long. And the best part is Via legally ships to nearly all states in the U.S. in discreet packaging directly to your door with a worry-free guarantee. No medical card required. So if you're 21 plus, check out our link in Via's website link in our description and use the code MAJORITY for 15% off. And if you're new to Via, get a free gift of your choice. I take these with me whenever I'm on the road like I am right now. And it's a healthy alternative to drinking alcohol, for instance, and then sometimes even using stimulants like coffee. So try Via and experience the full spectrum of benefits, microdosed and perfectly balanced. If you're 21 plus, check out our link to Via in the description. Use the code MAJORITY to receive 15% off. And if you're new to Via, get a free gift of your choice. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them that we sent you this year. Enhance your everyday with Via. All right, Jason. President Trump issued an executive order Tuesday that seeks greater authority over regulatory agencies that Congress established as independent from direct White House control. The order requires independent agencies to submit their proposed regulations to the White House for review, and it asserts the power to block those agencies from spending funds on projects or efforts that conflict with the president's priorities. There's a lot of back and forth here, on the in somewhat good news, it says that they basically can only that the president can only do what the law allows. But then within later in the same executive order, it says the law is whatever the president and the attorney general say it is. So that's where we are.
Well, that's convenient. Okay.
Yeah.
I have two thoughts on this. One, we have to keep in mind that part of the way that they do things is set up to make it very difficult to verbally combat what they're doing because they're doing so much all the time, right? They're not actually doing so much, but they're acting like they're doing so much all the time. That's the whole Steve Bannon, whatever it is, shove too much shit into the system where it can't handle it. So on the one hand, I want to say that we should ignore this, but we can't, because I think this is actually meaningful. There's a lot of important agencies that are independent, FDA being one of them, and FEC, it's all sorts of them. I think FEC is a good example. They tried to fire Ellen Weintraub, 2 weeks ago, who from the FEC, a Democratic member, and she was like, "You can't do that. You want to fire me? There's a way to do that. You can't just fire me." So I think the first thing is we have to talk about why it is important to have independent agencies and why Congress set certain agencies up to be independent. And I will take the first stab at it, which is that, some things we don't want to be overly political, like things like the Food and Drug Administration. It is a good thing, particularly if you're talking to somebody who maybe they came into the Trump world because of RFK Jr. or because they're, because during COVID, they were just super against the vaccine because they felt like it was a cash grab for the pharmaceuticals. Okay, well, it is good to have an independent agency that decides what medicines can go forward and be considered safe for the American public, that doesn't have to take campaign contributions in order to stay in their job. And if they're not independent, then they're basically run by people who need campaign money, and some of which can come from industry. I mean, off the top of my head, that'd be one reason.
I also think it's just a question of continuity, right? We have presidents for 4 years at a time, at most 8. You can't stand up entire new agencies with new personnel and totally new policies every 4 years. I mean, We may now have to, based on some of the things that are happening. But by design, the system is meant to outlast any one president so that there's policy continuity, that promises are kept, policy keeps going forward. The government runs, right? You can't, like, a good example is like the stuff around Trump firing people safeguarding our nukes this week, right? You can't have like new people, like you can't have all your people uh, the Department of Energy resign and then have all new people in time to safeguard the nukes on day one of the administration, right? You have to have a continuity. And I think we're now in a place where we can't take that for granted.
Also, from a business perspective, we talked about this in the past, that the idea of continuity, less volatility is a good thing. If you're trying to get people to invest into your country from outside and from within, if all of the rules can change every 4 years, then it's really hard to make an argument for sustained investment. It's why it's so hard for people to invest from the outside into China in anything other than cheap labor, because you never know what's going to be nationalized at any given moment. This is the reverse of that, but it has the same effect. It creates that volatility, which creates for really unstable markets. Not to mention the fact that, like, a lot of these agencies do crap like keep us from taking drugs that'll kill us. Like, I don't want them to submit stuff to politicians. I specifically want politicians to have arm's reach ability to oversee them, meaning congressional oversight in terms of funding, laws that Congress can pass and the president can sign about how they do what they do, and the ability to appoint the people who are going to be there for a period of time that's going to be longer than your presidency. That's plenty of influence over these agencies.
Totally. Well, let me give you a couple of just examples of things that have been going on here. So I alluded to one of these, which is that among the people who allegedly lost their jobs are dozens of people at the National Nuclear Security Administration, which sounds important. Scientists, engineers, safety officials who are responsible for safeguarding our nuclear warheads. Roughly 100 people were reportedly laid off from Pantex plant in Texas, the most important nuclear assembly and disassembly plant in the country, before they were called back to the office because apparently this was some kind of mistake. I'm sure you're very familiar that there have been layoffs at the Department of Veterans
Didn't that
Affairs.
happen at Twitter when Musk took over too? Didn't he like lay off a bunch of people he needed to run the place? And he was like, "Oh, would you please come back?" And then be fired again.
100%. You have the VA, which I'm sure you're familiar with, crisis hotline members, which is personal to you, I'm sure. And as you've said before, I'm not sure there are too many people running around saying that the VA is overstaffed.
Dude, it's not an exaggeration. I've written about it. I've spoken about it to say that the VA crisis line may have saved my life. And the idea that we were going to do anything to have fewer people there is amazing to me. And not to mention, like, okay, I got a buddy, he's a doctor who right now is attached to the VA as a doctor. He's there for like 6 months. And I said to him the other day, because the VA has a staffing problem. So they've had to bring in some private practice doctors to work in the VA. And I was like, how much do you like working at the VA? And he's like, it's amazing. Everybody who works there believes so much in what they're doing. And that's absolutely been my experience as a patient at the VA. Is like, the VA has its own problems, but the big misconception about the VA is that those problems are the VA's fault. Those problems, with very few exceptions, and look, from VA to VA, you have different, like any other system, you have different levels of leadership quality as you go around the country. But for the most part, the system that exists that makes the VA sometimes difficult to navigate comes from Congress. Every time they create a veterans benefit, they create it with the premise of how do we make sure that nobody who doesn't deserve this gets access to it, which is exactly the wrong way to think about it. And then you create this labyrinthine system. My point is, you don't solve that problem by having fewer employees at the VA to help people navigate the system, to deliver healthcare. And they'll say, well, they haven't really cut many direct healthcare providers. Well, what do you think happens when you cut the people who schedule the appointments, who get rooms ready for the next person? You make the system less efficient, and you've already created a system that's very difficult to make efficient because of the way Congress has set it up. So none of it's about efficiency. It's about making government small enough to strangle it in the bathtub.
This is definitely what's going on here. Here's the agenda. It's to cut faster than people can keep up with, and there's no commitment to cutting true fraud and waste. They just want to cut as many things as they possibly can. And Musk has been super sloppy about this. So like there was this incident over the past couple of days where the New York Times upshot went through the claims that Musk has made, where he finally put up a spreadsheet saying we've saved, I don't know, $40 billion or whatever through Doge cuts. The first claim they made was an $8 billion cut to ICE. And the New York Times just checked it and found out it was 8 million, not 8 billion. And people can read about this.
Dr. Evil shit.
Well, and it was just the first one. It was just the first item on the list. And there have been credible accusations out there that and it's hard to tell because they won't even admit that Musk is running Doge right now. So they won't even admit that. But there are a lot of people alleging that not only will they refuse to admit that they made this mistake of 8 billion versus 8 million, which is beyond disputed at this point that they made that mistake, but that they are doctoring and changing government records to cover up the fact that they made that mistake. And there's a lot of Twitter threads where people are starting to dissect all the claims about the savings. And needless to say, they're not saving as much money as they claim to save, even as they're causing a lot of havoc. The second part of this is that they're coupling these very sloppy and potentially catastrophic cuts through Doge with an effort to extend and expand tax cuts. And so I think if people are listening, you're like, how do you talk about this? Well, it's like I had a listener call in for the Lost Debate show and who was like, I like the Republicans because they treat my dollars like they're sacred. And I was like, well, let's use that analogy. And he said that taxation is theft. And I was like, okay, let me just take your premise to say that taxation is theft, even though I don't agree with that. What's going on here is the sum total of these first few months will undoubtedly be that the deficit will grow because of Trump policies. It won't shrink because the trillions of dollars of tax cuts are going to dramatically, to say the least, outweigh any cuts they're going to make through Doge. And that's completely sidestepping the conversation about whether those cuts are in the best interest of the country. And what it means is, if to use your metaphor of taxation as theft, is that we're stealing from future generations and in some cases our future selves here, because the fastest growing government program is the interest on the national deficit. And that interest is actually now larger than the entire Department of Defense budget. So that is, if taxation is theft, there's been more theft in this administration than ever before.
That is perfectly said. And let's use that as a jumping off point. Why are they willing to do things like borrow from the future, explode the deficit in order to make these huge tax cuts for what will mostly be wealthy folks? Because what Trump and Musk care about, they are really aligned on this. They don't care about the future. They don't care about building anything. I mean, Trump's governing modus operandi from the moment he came on the scene in popular culture, let alone as a politician, has been just get to tomorrow. Just figure it out. That's how he was as a real estate guy, right? Just take out tons of loans, debt. Okay, we'll declare bankruptcy. We'll move on. We'll deal with today's problems today. That's a tomorrow problem. And now he's doing that with our government, which is how you end up with something that's going to explode the deficit. But then the other thing is, we have to realize, is that they are both amazing at propagandizing these decisions to make it seem like they are doing something that is of value, because they take something that feels emotionally true or even has a kernel of real truth to it, and they wrap a bunch of things that are really their own self-serving agenda around that, and then they do it. So, for example, Doge. Is there waste and is there fraud in the government? Yes, of course there is. There is waste and fraud in corporate America. You give me any large or even semi-large or any organization that's been around for a minute, and there's waste. I will show you, a PTA budget is going to have some waste after a year. Like, That's a real thing. And so we can't make the mistake of being like, there's no waste, or not acknowledging that, because we lose our credibility when we do it. But then what we have to quickly pivot to is that that's not really what these guys are after. Okay. And I would focus on Musk, because people have formed their opinion on Trump. There are still people forming their opinion on Musk, and he is not anywhere near as popular as Trump. Neither of them are actually over 50% popular, but he's nowhere near as popular. And I think he's a way easier target, and he's the one doing this, right? He's like a Bond villain. All right. And he only cares about himself. The fact that he's finding no waste and no abuse in Tesla or SpaceX contracts is, I think, a big deal. And I think we should be talking about that all the time. We should be talking about the fact that he will be made only richer and more powerful by all of this stuff. Not to mention the fact that, as we've mentioned before, Trump is going to leave the political scene at some point. And Musk is not as skilled at Trump, and he cannot be president, but he is going to want to maintain power. And anybody who runs for president or for Senate in 2 years is going to have to go through the Musk primary. And that means we should make him as unpopular as we possibly can, which he is a billionaire out for his own interests. I don't think it should be that hard. And then we should tie him to every Republican, because he is the Republican Party now. All that said, we have to be very aware that he's no dummy either. And I read recently that he is trying to convince Trump to take all the quote unquote savings from this and issue checks to Americans as rebates.
Yeah.
Take that very seriously, because that is a devious and smart political move that, if we don't get out ahead of it, has a real chance to work.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have nothing to add to that. I think that's perfectly said. Well, let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about a little bit of cultural politics here, a little bit of Hollywood when we get back.
All right. You all know how important sleep is to me. That's why I'm obsessed with my Helix mattress. With everything going on in life, from work to a demanding social schedule to sports and kids, it's incredibly important to me that I'm getting a good night of sleep every night. My wife can attest. We've had our Helix mattress for well over 2 years now, and our sleep quality has improved tremendously. The Helix lineup offers 20 unique mattresses, including the award-winning Luxe collection, the newly released Helix Elite collection, a mattress designed for big and tall sleepers, and even a mattress made just for kids. So how will you know which Helix mattress works best for you and for your body? You take the Helix Sleep Quiz, and you find your perfect match in your perfect mattress in under 2 minutes, and your personalized mattress is shipped straight to your door free of charge. I took the Helix Sleep Quiz quite a while back to get my mattress, and I was matched with the Midnight Luxe because I sleep on my side and I like kind of a medium firm feel. It's a complete upgrade from the previous mattress that I had and all the mattresses really before that. Helix knows there's no better way to test out a new mattress than by actually sleeping on it in your own home. So they offer a 100-night trial and a 10 to 15-year warranty to try out your new Helix mattress. Helix has also been awarded the #1 mattress picked by GQ and Wired Magazine. It's even recommended by multiple leading chiropractors and doctors of sleep medicine as a go-to solution for improving your sleep. Helix is offering 27% off site-wide plus 2 free Dream pillows with mattress purchase and free bedding bundle with any Luxe or Elite mattress order if you go to helixsleep.com/majority. That's helixsleep.com/majority. This is their best offer yet, and it won't last long. With Helix, better sleep starts now.
When your car breaks down, you take it to a mechanic with no hesitation. You need it, and it's not something most guys can fix themselves. And men should think the exact same way about ED. But the reality is that you might be hesitant to seek help. Thankfully, through HIMS, you can get access to personalized ED treatment without stepping outside your door. HIMS is changing men's healthcare, providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. And HIMS provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewables, hard mints, and Viagra and Cialis, and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits, and just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. And if prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free, and no insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. And with hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, HIMS can help you find the ED option that works for you. Now start your free online visit today at hims.com/majority. That's HIMS.com/majority hims.com/majority for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/majority. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on the product and subscription plan. All right, Jason, we promised after the election that we would take a step back at points and examine certain cultural issues and questions that are relevant to our politics, but not always obviously so. Obviously, we're doing a whole podcast on sports, which is in that vein. And there's one story above all others that, to me, represents something really important about the new media environment that we're in. And this is the Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni controversy. And before I get into this, I just want to, you and I haven't talked about this at all. What do you know about this controversy?
Okay, I actually know more than you might think, just because I know usually I'm oblivious to stuff like this. So, all right, let me try. Blake Lively, an actor who is married to Ryan Reynolds, and she, I think she was. What was the show she was on originally?
Gossip Girl.
Gossip Girl, yeah, which I never saw, but that's sort of how she came on the scene. She did a movie where I think Justin Baldoni directed, and I think also was opposite her as like the co-lead or whatever. It was maybe like romantic movie. I think maybe had to do with domestic violence as a theme, possibly. Okay.
Correct.
And then it starts to get fuzzy for me. I believe she made some allegations possibly about either sexual harassment or like a toxic work environment on the set. And then I think he hired, stop me when I start to get this wrong, he hired some people to do like crisis communications, and it leaked that they were trying to basically destroy her reputation and her credibility as part of it. And it has really hurt that movie, among other things, and probably put her through a lot. How'd I do?
Pretty good. The movie actually did quite well.
Okay.
So before I give my sort of take on and I'll try to do my best to say what I know for sure versus what I think, because there's kind of an ocean of speculation here. But before I do anything, let me explain why we're even talking about this. It became apparent to me that the right wing and just non-political YouTube and Instagram and TikTok are obsessed with this story. And on the right wing, Megyn Kelly, Daily Wire, Candace Owens, you can keep going, right? Obsessed with this story, talking about it nonstop. And then there's a ton of apolitical TikTokers, et cetera. It's just, this stuff is all over the place. And then when I looked at just left-wing and centrist outlets, so not a whole lot. It reminds me in some ways of the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard stuff. And in some cases, there are a lot of the same players are involved here. So that got me curious. And I jumped in saying, all right, what is going on? And I've spent the past few days just kind of going through it all. And I just cut an hour-long episode, which will air, we're talking Wednesday. Tomorrow's Thursday. To the extent that people are interested in this story, I'm doing a whole hour on the Lost Debate podcast tomorrow. And the gist of the story that we know for certain is that this movie comes out, and then I'll explain why the right wing is obsessed with this and maybe why the left hasn't touched it too much yet. The movie comes out in August, and the internet starts noticing that Baldoni and Lively are not appearing together, and that Lively and Reynolds have unfollowed Baldoni on the internet. So in many ways, it's like a classic modern story, right? Like the internet sleuths and all this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of attention because there's a lot of fans of the book.
It's based on a book. Okay.
Based on a book, a very popular book that became popular on Book Talk, like TikTok, which also is another modern element of the story. Then people on the internet start, fans of the book in particular, start getting mad at Blake Lively because she's using her appearances around the premiere to promote different, like a beverage line that she had and some other kind of commercial enterprise. I forgot what it was. but not mention domestic violence. While Baldoni is going around talking about domestic violence, which is in his history. Like he has a lot of like advocacy in his history. He's written books about masculinity, things like this. And like he's kind of accused of being like a beta male by the right before all this is going on. And Lively is getting like hit pretty hard during that period of time. And the old videos resurfaced where she was kind of mean to a reporter. And it's like, people have probably seen this clip before where the reporter asks her about her like baby bump, and then she goes back to the reporter who is not pregnant and actually, it turns out, couldn't have kids, and says, "What about your bump?" which is a really mean thing to say, and the internet was not kind about all that. And that's all that basically happens over the summer. And if that was all that happened, everybody's fine. Yeah, Blake Lively gets hit really, like, it's not the best press for her, but the movie did really well. Everybody makes a lot of money, and yeah, like inconvenient. But then in December, a New York Times article comes out that reports that Lively has pushed a lawsuit against Baldoni, his production company, and some crisis PR people who have a history. Like, these are some of the people involved in the Johnny Depp situation too. Making a bunch of allegations, including that Baldoni had some improper behavior, including like going in her like trailer while she was breastfeeding, or like being aggressive during some of the sex scenes, and also that like the crisis PR people were set out to, like, were behind all of the negative press that Lively had. And then Baldoni is the one who now is facing all the scrutiny, and people are unearthing videos of him, including a speech he gave at his wedding, which people can look at it. I don't really see what the controversy there was. He gave a speech at his wedding basically being, I'm sorry for not being perfect until now kind of stuff, which like I'm sure is said a lot at weddings. But could be read in a way where he was basically confessing to infidelity before like the wedding, which is again his business as far as I'm concerned. But basically the same kind of thing is happening with him that was happening with Lively, which is every like unflattering things coming out. WME, which I know you've had a relationship with before and still, dropped him because they were, which is an agency for people listening, dropped him quickly because they also represent Reynolds and Lively. He is posthumously has an award rescinded that he won for his advocacy for women, right? So that's
like, you mean retroactively?
Retroactively, sorry. Posthumously means he's dead, right?
Yeah.
So that's round 2. Okay. Round 3, which we're kind of in the midst of right now, is like Baldoni back, like from, back with a vengeance, where he did something, regardless of where people come down on this issue, which I think he did something that's really interesting just from a communications perspective, which is he released a website basically dumping all the discovery that has been collected so far onto the website and allowed the YouTubers to make do with it, right? And he also sued the New York Times for defamation and misrepresentation. I forget what the exact cause of action is. Sued Lively and Reynolds. And made a bunch of claims, and people could read the website. And the website has a bunch of different like communications with Reynolds and communications with Lively, and there's a lot of potential Taylor Swift stuff that's insinuated and all this kind of stuff. But it's during this phase 3 that the right wing swoops in and basically is and in the non-political Twitter, Instagram, etc. And they're pulling out this communications. And they're very sympathetic to Baldoni because there's a lot of stuff in there that we don't need to go into. People can listen to my pod that, like, based on the facts we have today on February 19th, certainly do a fairly good job of pushing back on the allegations against him, right? And everything is very preliminary, right? We're in the middle of very important lawsuits, like very high-powered lawyers on both sides, including a good friend of mine who's Blake Lively's attorney, Mike Gottlieb. I don't know if you know Mike Gottlieb. He's also representing Drake. So I'll pause there. There's so much going on here, and I'll give my opinion at some point to the extent people are interested on who I think is right or wrong in all of this. But I want to just pause and say this is representative of the new media atmosphere that we're in right now, and I find it really interesting that the right is obsessed with this and the left is not touching it that much, and I think that's fascinating.
Why is it? First of all, why is the right obsessed with it? Is it just because is it, how much of it has to do with that she's a successful woman and they want to paint him as a victim, and where's it coming from?
I think it has to do with the fact that I think as the facts stand today, it's not a flattering Me Too story for the Me Too movement. It on the facts that exist today, which I keep saying, there is a credible case to be made that Lively leveraged the Me Too sentiment to punish somebody who is standing in the way of her taking over a movie. And maybe this is where I put my cards on the table. As of my reading of the facts today, that's how I read what I've read so far. And there's a ton of evidence. People can listen tomorrow if they're interested. There's a ton of evidence that basically this is very powerful Hollywood people. She wanted to rewrite the script, wanted to do her own director's cut of the movie, and bulldoze this guy. Basically successfully did all of those things. And then she was getting negative press, which he may be responsible for. Like, that has not been proven one way or the other, whether his crisis PR people did in fact push that press. And there's actually pretty sensible evidence that his people did push a lot of the negative press against her. So those two things could both be true. And that they tried to push a narrative about him that, at least on the face of what has been released so far, it has not been substantiated. And actually, there's a lot of evidence that seems to suggest that it didn't happen. And I can go through a bunch of stuff, but there's like a lot of like very explicit evidence that is rare in these types of circumstances, where there are things being said and texted that seem to explicitly contradict claims that are being made. And other things that are public, where Lively will say things like, I like to get hired as an actress, and then I like to rewrite the script, and yada, yada. Like, there was this comments that came out in this forum thing. So I'll say, like, my opinion on this matter, less important than I think the fact that what the right likes about it is that it is a story, according to them, of Me Too gone too far. And the New York Times writer who wrote the story about this controversy is Megan Twohy, or Twohy, I never know how to say her name, who wrote the Weinstein stories, which I've been very positive about. I think those were really important, good journalism that she did. She wrote what a lot of people think is a slanted article, the right certainly believes is a slanted article about Baldoni back in December. And then Nicholas Kristof wrote an opinion piece a couple weeks later, which I think is hard to argue is anything but slanted, even if you agree with Lively's take, because in it, he compares Baldoni to the Baldoni case to Giselle Pericote, who was raped by like 50 plus people in France. And he explicitly says he has a relationship with Lively and wrote this piece. So it's kind of a mess, honestly. And I have to be honest, like, my instinct is to not like what the right is doing. And there is no doubt crazy shit that they're doing on this story. But the story is not flattering for the Me Too movement, which is why the left isn't touching it that much. Because, like, if it were, a lot of the people who like to talk about these things, me being one of them, like I spent a lot of time talking about Harvey Weinstein and what the need for justice and all this kind of stuff. I think people don't know what to do with it because it's kind of messy circumstance and potentially counterproductive to the movement. And it also involves very powerful people who at least I have always had a high degree of regard for in Lively and in Reynolds. And so it's a very uncomfortable story.
So it's another instance of where the right is very good at finding accessible touch points that are outside of politics to drive a political narrative. It's why it's why the more white supremacist, band of the American right jumped onto Kaepernick so hard and tried to drive it so hard, right? Whereas when other more popular or less polarizing figures said some of the same things, they let that go, right? They were like, we're not going to touch that, right? And I guess this is part of argument regardless, is you try to accentuate the things that are most helpful to your cause. Well, I clearly only knew the very, just the very surface of it. So
there could be a round four, right? And so everything I say is provisional based on the evidence that we have today. And I think the thing that makes this interesting, even beyond politics, but also related to politics, is the amount of discovery that's going to pull in WME and to potentially Taylor Swift. There's a whole separate lawsuit going on where it appears the Lively camp made a huge mistake in the sequencing of things. And I try to explain this on my pod, but the short version is they made a filing in California that was meant to protect them from defamation because, as you probably know from civil law, like if you make a claim in a court document, it can't be subject to defamation suits because it's in the course of litigation. It's called litigation privilege, I think it's called. But they named a guy who is not a public figure in that document, who's a crisis PR guy, which is mistake number one. Mistake number two is, at least allegedly, they leaked that document before it became public to the press, which gets rid of the litigation privilege. And so now they've got a guy who's not a public figure, as a lower standard for the defamation claim, suing them in Texas without potentially the litigation privilege, which means that even if they settle with Baldoni, they have this other nuisance going on that's going to have its own set of discovery. So even if they settle with this guy, they've got that thing going on. And it's in Texas, which we can all imagine what the kind of venue is going to look like for them there. It's not great. And I think the biggest lesson in reading all of this is, and I gave my take on like what I think so far is in this, but you could read the text. Nobody comes across looking well in this circumstance. Is that like people are sometimes their own worst enemies. It's like if everybody just would have moved on after August, like everybody's in a better position than they are today.
Well, and I think your overall point is that the listeners need to be on the lookout for things that may not seem political, but are political, because
For sure.
the right is going to make it political. So you don't really have a choice but to be knowledgeable about it if you're going to discuss, the things that are actually shaping people's views, particularly on cultural issues.
Yeah. Just look at YouTube. If people just want to be curious as to what a modern media story looks like, just search YouTube for any of these Blake Lively versus Baldoni or whatever, you'd be shocked. And a lot of these people are not political people. There's a lot of random cultural stuff going on in YouTube. And final point on this is I just want to underscore this. Like, as we headed into the election, we had Trump going on all these random podcasts, some of them that didn't appear political, some were not political, but became political the minute he got on there and have remained political. That's why I think we pay attention to this stuff. These people who are entering this with these huge YouTube pages, who might not have ever talked about politics, are going to get sucked into a certain culture, which is why I think it's important for us to engage them on this stuff, because there's a whole separate conversation happening that if we're not a part of it, it becomes this huge conversation happening that will have political valence down the line for us, which is why I'm engaging with it. As much as I don't like to weigh in on claims like this prematurely, but I feel it's important to engage in the discussion, because it's going to have a certain level of momentum and audience that are people who don't normally pay attention to politics, and we need to have something to say about this kind of stuff, whether we like it or not.
Yeah. All right. Before we move on, real quick, grab an oar. I just want to again remind people they can go to afghanevac.org to learn more about what the Trump administration is doing with regard to Afghan allies and refugees and people who served alongside us overseas. The report this week is that in addition to shutting down the entire refugee program internationally, except apparently for Afrikaners from South Africa, which leaves tens of thousands of Afghans who have done more for this country than most Americans in peril in Afghanistan, on the run and in hiding from the Taliban, they now are apparently making plans to completely disassemble the office that actually works to help those Afghans eventually get out of the country and get here. And it's just, I do believe that it's all Stephen Miller doing all this. And I do believe that if Trump and others who tried to get a lot of political mileage out of the Afghanistan issue understood what was being done by Stephen Miller, I think they would consider reversing it, because it does not help them politically to shut this down. And I don't think they would necessarily overturn it for moral or humane reasons, but they might for political reasons. And the more noise people make, the more of a difference it'll make. So people should go to afghanevac.org. All right. With all that seriousness, let's, before we go to one for us, again, folks, Ravi and I and our friend Adisu Demisi have been having fun with this show on Valor Media Network. It's called The Game Within. It is about the politics and the business of sports and how the politics and business of sports affect what happens on the field. So if you like sports and you like politics, it's us talking about both and how they interact. And we stream it live at 3:30 Central on Tuesdays, and then it drops on audio on Tuesday evenings. And you can find it on YouTube or anywhere where you get your podcasts. It's on the Valor Media Network. It's called The Game Within. And we'd ask you to go give it a listen and give it a review so more people can find it. And that's always true of this show too. But before we go on, what is going on? Everything we talked about is so sad and depressing today, Ravi.
Yeah. Well, two things. One is I want to thank some members of the audience who've gone out there and helped me. And I've been circumspect, and I soon will say more about this novel that I have coming out soon. But some folks who've gone out there and helped me get some reviews out there. But if you're listening to this and you have a Goodreads account or Book Talk or any kind of book promotion, and you want to help me with my novel, which you know nothing about based on this, but if you want to learn more, just shoot me a note. You could either send me a DM on Instagram or go to ravimgupta.com and go to the contact us page and shoot me a note and get you a copy of it to review. But on the other side of things, I'm in New Orleans. I'll be bouncing back and forth from New Orleans to New York over the course of the next few months. I have an apartment in the French Quarter, and I'm working on a narrative series about the 20th anniversary of Katrina, which is this coming fall. And I just touched down a couple days ago, and I don't know if you spent a lot of time in New Orleans, but I was walking through Audubon Park, or probably saying that wrong, in uptown New Orleans the first day I got here with my friend Jay, who's like a former school leader here. And I just remember thinking, I was talking to him, I'm like, this place has the strongest culture of any place in America, easily. Like, it's just distinct in every interaction you have. Is that it's a proud place with in one of the few places where this flattening of culture due to the algorithms and the internet and all this, like, of course it's having its effect everywhere, including here, but this place is so distinct in such a beautiful spot. And I'm just really excited to spend more time here over the next few months.
Yeah, I'm jealous. New Orleans is great. I've spent a bit of time there, and it's always been a blast. Well, all right. Well, this was fun. Thanks, everybody, for listening. You can find Ravi everywhere at Ravi M. Gupta. You can find me everywhere at Jason Kander. Please leave a 5-star review for this show as well. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.